Hello and welcome to the Larson Hicks podcast slash YouTube channel. It's great to be here. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a minute. I've had just like allergies. I don't know, sinus issues. I don't know what it is. I thought it was a cold or something, and it's kind of come and gone and just sort of lingered. And here in Huntsville, Alabama, right now, the weather is everything's blooming. Pollen is coating the cars, so I think it's that. I think I'm officially a Huntsville person now because I've become allergic to its pollen. I think that makes me official. Um, but I wanted to record a video. It's been a minute, and wanted to just kind of get back on the horse with respect to this channel. And one of the things that came up this week at church, there was a family who were Baptists and really committed Baptists, very serious Baptists, 9 marks, Reformed Baptists who really felt very strongly about their Baptist convictions and anyway, they were visiting church, and they let me know on Sunday that, hey, we're joining this church. We've left our church and we're coming to yours. And I said, oh, that's crazy. What happened? And we had lunch with these folks a couple weeks ago. Their friends are members of our church and had invited them and invited us to lunch. And they kind of just cornered me and wanted to talk about this whole baptism thing. And so we just talked, and we kind of went over a lot of different things. I don't think I made any arguments, any new biblical arguments that I hadn't heard. But he told me on Sunday that there was one particular story I told that had a big impact on him. So I figured I'd share it because maybe it'll be helpful for some of you out there who are looking at this and thinking about it. And I'll start by just saying I don't think anybody who grew up Baptist like I did leaves that conviction easily or slowly. And frankly, I think it's a great thing. I don't think we should be quick to just kind of like abandon the beliefs that we were raised with and trained with. It's a whole way of seeing the Bible, frankly, and it's not a quick switch. If it's a quick switch, I think it's almost that's a little scary to me in a lot of ways. Like if it's not something that you have to really wrestle with, that takes a little bit of time. I'm not saying that can't happen, but I don't think it's a bad thing at all that people take time, years in a lot of cases to kind of work through those convictions. And so one of the things I said is that I really don't think anybody who makes that jump from being kind of a Reformed Baptist to becoming a Paedo-Baptist, that anybody really makes that jump on purely theological grounds. I think the arguments are there. You can see them. I think they're both. I think the arguments are strong, but I don't think they're strong enough to compel somebody completely on the face of them. I think what really does it for most people, what certainly did it for me, is living in community, living in a healthy Paedo-Baptist church community, and seeing the fruit of that theology working its way out in a consistent way. So the problem is that there are so many Paedo-Baptists in the Baptist world and in the Catholic world and in the Episcopalian world and Lutheran that don't live out their faith, live out the teaching of this faithfully. Most of those people don't admit children to the Lord's table, which feels like an inconsistency to Baptists, and I think it is. And they also, baptism ends up being kind of stripped of its meaning and its purpose, and it becomes kind of a wet baby dedication. And it doesn't, there's still this like, well, we're not really sure though. Like you're baptized, but we don't really know if you're like legit. So we're gonna kind of wait and see. And so you end up with like Catholic confirmation. Presbyterians do the same thing. It's call it what you want to call it, but it's the same thing. They've got First Holy Communion essentially and confirmation process. And so The story that I told this guy, I won't continue down all the different arguments, but the story that I told the guy was I was in the Pacific Northwest for about 12 years. Take a sip of tea here, in my pink cup. It's just one of the bigger cups, and so it holds a lot of tea, and I didn't want to go refill a bunch of times. So the story, so I promoted concerts, and these were all secular indie rock bands, indie folk bands, a lot of bands from the Pacific Northwest. And so when I lived up in Idaho, that was just a side hustle I did. I put on about 100 concerts, and I put on a couple music festivals. And so something I was big into. And every show I'd have, a headliner and a supporting band and usually an opener. And so there's usually three bands. Most of them always out of town folks, people I'd never met before, and very frequently from the Northwest or California. And so there's a green room in the back where when there's sound checks happening and when the opening band's playing, we're kind of hanging out in the back talking. I was big on hospitality and hanging out and getting to know these folks. And inevitably, one of the first questions is, well, are you married? Do you have kids? Tell me about your kids. And I had this experience a bunch of times where a band, somebody in a band would say, oh yeah, I'm married. I've got kids. I got a little boy. And, tell me about your boy. What's he like? Oh man, he's so fun. He's into everything. He loves trucks and he loves anything guns, military stuff. He's just all over it. And as soon as those, like, you could see on their face that they were like nervous saying those things, and almost immediately following that statement was, but we never forced it on him. Like, we never forced the male stuff. We gave him dolls. We gave him the options. He just chose the boy stuff. He's just so into the boy stuff or the girl stuff. You'd have the same conversation about girls, and keep in mind this is 2000 and this is 10, 15 years ago, right? That most of these conversations are happening. So this is like well before I think a lot of this stuff is like hit the mainstream, which is also an interesting point that we're sort of seeing that stuff really hit the mainstream right now. But it was there in Portland and Seattle. It's been there for 20 years, or more, 30 years. And it's just now starting to really rear its head in a way that's like undeniable in public. So anyway, I always thought these conversations were really interesting, that they were apologizing for the fact that their kids chose, the gender that they were born with. And they wanted to really make sure it was clear to me that they didn't force gender on their kids. I just think about the psychological damage that does. Imagine growing up with your parents saying, you may be a boy, you may not be a boy, you may be a girl. We don't really know what you are. We'll see, right? And so you're always kind of looking around, and questioning, well, am I a boy? Like, I like this pink mug. Does that mean I'm a girl? Maybe I am a girl, and it kind of, it causes you to have this kind of confusion and ask these questions that you wouldn't be asking. And I just think about it, frankly, I think it's child abuse. I mean, I think it's psychological abuse to your children to treat them that way. But the thing that Baptists do that I think is very much a similar thing is we go, well, you say you're a Christian, and frankly, I say Baptist, but really a lot of Presbyterians do the same thing. We think you're elect, but we're not really sure. So yeah, you're baptized in the Presbyterian sense, or as a Baptist. Yeah, you're saying you love Jesus. You say you like to come to church and you like God's people, but we're gonna just wait and see, if you produce fruit and if it's sincere before we take the step to baptize you, like, because we can't say for sure, and this could be fake, and it creates this tension, I think, and I think it's, in a lot of ways, I think it's worse in the Presbyterian world where it's like you're baptized, but you're not allowed to come to the table, and so you're always telling your kid, well, yeah, you're in. We think you're a Christian, but we're not really totally sure yet, so we're not going to let you come sit at the table. It's like at my dinner table, when do I let my kids come to the dinner table? Like that's the dinner table for Hicks children. You know, I've got a little newborn who's 5 months old or whatever. She is being held by somebody at the table while we're having dinner. You know, it's not like, and she can't even eat solid food yet, but she's at the table because she's a Hicks. She's one of us. That's her place, is at this table. And so I imagine the emotional, psychological damage that it would cause for our little one to say, well, you know, yeah, you're eating solid food. You can talk, but, you know, we're not really sure yet if you are really one of us. And so we're going to have you eat dinner in another room. And we're going to eat dinner. The Hicks family's going to eat dinner, but you're going to be over there, and we'll just see, you know, if you really show some fruit and show some maturity and prove that you really want to be a Hicks and you're good at it and it's sincere and it's from the heart, then maybe we'll let you come to the table. So I think the same thing's happening, like I said, in the Presbyterian world with folks that are really slow to admit children to the table and have a really high bar about fencing the table. And then I think on the Baptist world, it's just with baptism and you know, this super hardcore perspective of like, we're not going to baptize you until you've like left the house and you've like borne fruit in your life, and we can really see that it's legit. And you know what I was taught by my pastor up in Idaho for years was that when a kid disobeys, the reaction of a Baptist is, yeah, well, he's a sinner, he's unregenerate. Yeah, I mean, that's why he needs Jesus. That's why we need to evangelize him, and hopefully someday he'll come to Jesus. For a Presbyterian who doesn't practice communion with kids, doesn't invite kids to the table, they go, yeah, you know, he may not be regenerate. I don't know. We'll see. You know, we'll see how he turns out. We want to say he's a Christian, but we'll see. I'm not really sure with that kind of attitude. Maybe he's not. I think of that terrible parenting thing that I've been tempted to say myself to kids. You know, I'll treat you like a man when you start acting like a man. I think that's totally backwards. I think the way that we train up young men to be men is to say to them, you are a man, and men don't treat women this way, or men don't behave this way, and therefore that's the standard I'm holding you to. I had this issue just yesterday. One of my little boys got frustrated with his sister, his older sister, and he hit her, and he got a big spanking for it. And I just said, look, I don't need to hear anything about what happened other than the fact that, you know, did you, yes or no, hit your sister? We don't do that. We're men. We protect women. We honor women. And we never use our strength against women, and that's it. And for him, I'm calling him, I'm grabbing him by his God-given gender and biology, and saying, this is who God made you to be. God made you strong and aggressive, and that is something you're supposed to use in a particular way to bless and serve your family. And you're never supposed to turn that on your sisters. And so in the same way with what I was taught in Idaho was, you grab your kids by their baptism. It's the same sort of thing. You say, son, we're Christians. This is how God's law instructs us to live, and this is how you're living, and we as Christians, you're baptized believer. This is how we live. And you know, when you look at Scripture, it's like that's what we're commanded to do. You know, I mean, go back to the Shema, right, in Deuteronomy 6. You know, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You know, we are to teach our children from the very beginning while we're walking on the road. You know, we're to tell them about God's mighty works, and we're to teach them how to live. We're to teach them what God's done for us and what He expects of us, and how we're to respond. And so it's how Scripture commands parents to live and how to train their kids. And there's just this weird tension and inconsistency that I think Baptists have to live with, where they love their kids desperately. They want to train them and teach them God's word, but they can't call them Christians. And it's like we can never get out of the starting gates. Like we can't move towards maturity because we've got to see them prove that they're really Christians first, and then we can start working on maturity in the faith. Where it's like um, the promise to Abraham is to his children and his children's children to 1,000 generations. As God's people, we are inheritors of that promise, and we get to claim it on our children's behalf and own it. And look, people fall away from the faith. As a matter of fact, this is one of the big hang-ups, I think, with a lot of Presbyterians is, well, they can't, if they fall away, they didn't really fall away. They were just never really saved in any real way. And this is where kind of what's been called the federal vision has gotten a lot of people in a lot of trouble. But it's a real thing. It's Jesus said, "I'm the vine, you're the branches. Those who don't bear fruit are chopped off and thrown in the fire." Well, what were they connected to before they were chopped off and thrown into the fire? Were they just hovering next to the tree, kind of pretending to be connected, but they weren't really connected? No, they were connected to Jesus in a real way, in a substantive way. And I'm not God. I don't understand the mysteries of what all is happening, what His Spirit is doing. I mean, I look at who is in the New Testament, Simon, the magician, right? The guy who it says he received the Spirit and was doing miracles essentially, but then this guy fell away. Clearly, seems to have fallen away. So what's up with that? How does that work? Well, I think if we're going to try to be so tidy that God that there's not a category for people to fall away from the faith, then this doctrine is going to be really challenging. And I think, but Baptists have the same problem. I mean, I was a Baptist. I watched my friends get baptized and rebaptized every time they fell away and rededicated their lives. I was like, okay, it's going to stick this time. Last time it wasn't sincere, but this time it's really emotional. Therefore, it must be super sincere. And it's like, how about you're one of God's people and you're broken, you're a mess, you're a sinner, you have peaks and valleys, just like David did. You don't lose your salvation. You may lose the joy of your salvation. Restore unto me the joy of my salvation. You may lose that. You may feel the distance and the separation from God and from His Spirit that your sin has caused. But that doesn't make you not a believer. What makes you not a believer is abandoning the faith entirely and rejecting Christ and remaining in your unrepentant state, right? But our kids, I don't have any kids like that. I've got 7 kids. They're all sinners. I promise you that. And they've all had different periods of stubbornness about different sins in the same way that I have. But they're Christians. It doesn't make them less a Christian. And they've been learning since they were very, very little what repentance looks like, how to make things right, how to apologize both to each other or the people they've sinned against and to God. And so that's a habit that's deeply, deeply ingrained in them. And I get to do that because I believe they're Christians. I've baptized them. They've been baptized because God's put His mark on them and claimed them. And so I get to train them up as Christians and trust God to save them and to regenerate their hearts. And I don't know how and when and why, and I don't think that it's that I get to just point to the baptism and say, well, there it is, it's settled, it's final, they're a believer, and they don't have any obligation. It doesn't matter what happens now, they're saved. The covenant, the definition of covenant that I learned is a self-maledictory oath with attendant blessings and curses. So it's a promise where you say, may this harm, this I'm going to cut a covenant, I'm going to cut a animal in half, I'm going to pass through it, I'm going to say, if I break this covenant, let that happen to me. Let me be cut in half in the same way that animal was. Or like the rainbow. The rainbow is a bow pointed up at God, where he's basically saying, may if I break this promise, may this destruction and harm come upon me. So it's a self-maledictory oath with attendant blessings and curses. There's blessings for remaining in covenant and keeping covenant, and there's curses for breaking covenant and not keeping covenant. And that's the nature of how God how God has dealt with mankind since the beginning of time, and it remains the case. So I'm going off on all kinds of tangents. I really wanted to just tell the story about what I think is a really good example of the kind of weird psychological games that we're playing with our kids when we try to remain consistent with our Baptist theology or our fencing the table election theology. I think there's a wonderful middle way, and that way has a precedent, old precedent in the church that goes all the way back, and it's claiming God's promises, baptizing children, households. There's believers baptism. There's also covenant baptism, where you're baptizing children or households, and that's God putting His mark on them, God covenanting with them, and then there's attendant, blessings and curses for those who are on the other end of that covenant. So I'll stop there. I hope that's helpful. I kind of rambled and went on a bunch of different rabbit trails, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, maybe opening a much bigger can of worms than I want to try to tackle, but I hope that was helpful. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. All right.